crack of the gunshot echoed in the server room, hanging in the air like the final note of a symphony. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. Vincent staggered backward, his eyes wide with shock as he clutched his chest. Blood seeped through his fingers, staining his shirt as his legs buckled beneath him. He collapsed to the floor, gasping, his breath ragged and uneven. Ilara watched in stunned silence, her heart pounding in her chest. Ria stood there, the pistol still trembling in her hand, her eyes fixed on Vincent's crumpled form. Her face was a mixture of grief and exhaustion, as though the weight of what she had done was finally crashing down on her. Vincent struggled to lift his head, his eyes locking onto Ilara one last time. You could have saved everything, he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't understand. Ilara swallowed hard, her throat tight. You weren't saving the world, Vincent, you were trying to control it. A weak smile flickered across Vincent's lips, his eyes glassy. Control is the only way to save them. With a final shuddering breath, Vincent's body went still, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The room fell into a suffocating silence, broken only by the soft hum of the remaining systems powering down. It was over. Ilara collapsed to her knees, exhaustion and adrenaline draining from her all at once. She could barely feel her body, but the crushing weight of everything that had just happened settled over her like a heavy blanket. Ria dropped the gun, the metal clattering loudly on the floor as she sank down beside Ilara, her body shaking from shock and the weight of her injuries. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The gravity of the situation pressed down on them, a bitter mix of relief and sorrow washing over the room. Finally, Ilara turned to Ria, her voice barely a whisper. We stopped him. Ria nodded weakly, her face pale from blood loss. Yeah, she breathed, but at what cost? Ilara didn't have an answer. They had prevented Vincent from taking control of Nexus, but the cost had been high. The betrayal, the violence, the lives shattered in the process. It all felt like too much. They sat in silence for a few minutes, gathering what little strength they had left. Ilara finally pushed herself up, extending a hand to Ria. Come on, we need to get out of here before Nexus's security protocols kick in. Ria took her hand, wincing as she rose to her feet. Blood still dripped from the wound on her forehead, but she nodded determinedly. We have to destroy the core, Ilara. We can't leave any trace of this system behind. It's too dangerous. Ilara nodded in agreement. She made her way to the terminal, entering the command that would trigger the final shutdown and erase Nexus's existence from the network for good. The server room lights flickered once more, and then, one by one, they went dark. Nexus was no more. With the system gone, the building's emergency lights clicked on, bathing the room in a pale, sterile glow. The once menacing machines now stood silent, their power stripped away. Ilara and Ria moved slowly through the darkened corridors, the weight of what they had just been through pressing down on them with every step. When they finally reached the exit, the cool night air hit them like a breath of fresh air. Outside, the city continued on as if nothing had changed, unaware of the battle that had just been fought to protect its future. Ilara stared out at the skyline, the lights of the buildings twinkling in the distance. For the first time in what felt like ages, she allowed herself to breathe. It was over, but the scars of this fight would remain forever. We did it, Ria said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the city. But I can't help but wonder, was it enough? Ilara shook her head. I don't know, she admitted. But we stopped Vincent, and for now, that has to be enough. They stood there in silence for a few more moments, each of them processing what had happened. The wind tugged at their clothes, carrying with it the distant sounds of life continuing, oblivious to the chaos that had almost consumed them all. Finally, Ilara turned to Ria, a flicker of determination in her eyes. We have to rebuild, not just Nexus, but everything. This whole system needs to change, and maybe, just maybe, we can do it the right way this time. Ria looked at her, weary but resolute. You really think we can make a difference? Ilara nodded. We have to try. For all the people like Vincent who believed control was the only way, we have to prove there's another path. Ria Elaria smiled faintly, her expression softening. Then let's get to work. As they walked away from the darkened building, leaving the remnants of Nexus and Vincent's twisted vision behind them, Ilara couldn't help but feel a strange sense of hope. The future was uncertain and the world was still full of chaos. But for the first time in a long time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to build something better.